I started off as a medic in the Army, then I went to nursing school, I've worked in the ER, and now a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And even currently being treated for PTSD related to some secondary trauma that triggered personal trauma, right? This is your specialty. Right. So it hits really close to home for me personally. I'm so excited about what you guys are doing. So if you could start by introducing yourself and kind of telling us a little bit about your business.
I'm Dan Crampton, a licensed psychologist here in Colorado. Ann and I co-founded Status Code 4 back in 2017 as a nonprofit working with first responders and their families.
And specifically, what are you doing?
Predominantly, we're doing counseling services, so psychotherapy. We also offer financial coaching services and
relationships.
Where can someone find those films?
On our website.
Okay, perfect. And we'll have all that down in the description for people. You really put together this very specialized, first responder, all the things that they need for the stress of their job. What brought you to that point? What is your story? What is your why?
So I was in EMS for 25 years, retired as a paramedic in 2018, even though we started Status Code 4 in 2017. But when I went through some of the job-related stressors, post-traumatic stress, burnout, there were no resources available for me for people that understood working with first responders. So I decided that that's what I was going to dedicate all of my training to.
And let's talk about kind of the personality difference with a first responder and why they might need, a specific kind of care.
I think the biggest thing is they're a closed group. For me personally, when I first sought out counseling, talking to the counselor, we were doing some EMDR, and she didn't understand the EMS world, and so I was afraid of the vicarious trauma with her. And then we're talking about what it is that I do on the job. So spent most of the time explaining to her what the world of first responder is all about. That's one of the big things that we hear a lot with a lot of our first responder clients that have sought out therapists from the civilian world, if you will, that they just don't understand it. They don't understand the trauma. They don't understand the lingo. They don't understand the added stressors. They have life stressors, and then you add on the job stressors, and it can get pretty intense.
Counselors are taught to teach people boundaries, and you should remove yourself from your trauma. But this is our job. This is our life. This is our passion. We want to be first responders, right? We want to continue helping people. Somebody has to do it. That's where some of that disconnect is with someone who doesn't have that EMS experience, is that they see it of, well, if this is too stressful for you, then you should find another job. and that's not what we want.
That too.
Oh, were you told that?
My first counselor told me that, right? And so I stopped going to counseling. Took 3 more years before I finally went back.
Yeah. So it's just so important to have that, first responder EMS community. And then you went back to school for a PhD, PsyD.
I started while I was full-time EMS. I went back to school, got my bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, all in psychology.
And you knew you were going to be helping first responders.
Yeah, I pretty much knew that from the start of my bachelor's program.
So thank you for sharing, that you sought out counseling. How many counselors did it take before you found one that could help you?
3. It was the 3rd one, although he didn't have first responder experience. He had a lot of work working with trauma and abused children. Telling him some of the stories that I experienced on the ambulance, he didn't bat an eye.
And didn't tell you to quit your job?
Didn't tell me to quit my job. He kind of kicked me in the rear end a couple times.
That's always a good counselor, one that can move forward and make the decisions that you need to make. What made you decide, I'm going all in with my husband and I'm going to be a part of this?
Well, I have a different track.
Okay.
So Dan and I met late in life in 2016. And prior to that, I was in the Air Force for about 21 years, and then was a defense contractor after that. During my time in the military, I sought counseling. I was diagnosed with a moderate form of depression. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because through all of the CBT and the resiliency skills that I learned through all of that, I was able to, kind of manage life as I knew it, and the challenges through that. But then in 2015, my then husband passed away in my arms, and that was a pretty traumatic event for me. I would say that maybe I had a slight form of PTSD from all of that, because it was a very short-term notice death diagnosis, and then he died. And then shortly after that, his mother passed away. And so I had to handle both of them within a year. So Dan was brought into my life a year after Ted had passed away. Going back to when Ted passed, that planted a seed in my heart that said I needed to be feeding my soul. I needed to be doing something that fed my soul, that had more meaning. Because, I loved what I was doing, but it wasn't fulfilling. When I met Dan and he shared his vision of wanting to provide trauma therapy for first responders, and then his story and everything, it just really resonated with me. The military mentality is very similar to the culture is very similar to the first responder area. And then just from the time that we were dating and engaged, what I saw from his time with the EMS world, I could have a pretty decent appreciation for what relationships went through. And so I said, well, if we're going to do this, we really need to bring in the family element, because you cannot separate the two. My first husband was a drug addict, alcoholic, and very abusive, and so I kind of got that side of it, and fortunately I got out of that relationship. Everything that happened in my life up until the time I met Dan, I think prepared me for handling this job, because I work with the couples more in relationship skill building, because I'm not a counselor, but I have the street creds for it.
Absolutely.
So, and then I do a lot of the education.
Let's talk about grief. I've lost 3 children over the course of 17 years, and I realize that the deeper I get into this, that our culture, we don't really know how to grieve. We don't teach how to grieve. We actually teach that mental strength is kind of just being able to move on and handle things. How did you process the grief of losing your husband, and kind of how are you incorporating that into what you're doing?
I think, I didn't do the recommended way, that's for sure. They say to, talk to people, get around people, and all that kind of stuff. But that's my go-to method. As an introvert, I tend to, want to deal with things myself and process things myself. But I had my grief attacks, and they're very real, very somewhat debilitating too. But I think allowing yourself to be okay with how you grieve, I think, is the biggest thing. And recognizing that you now have to learn to live without that person in your life. It's your journey, and your journey alone. And you're going to have people that are going to come up and say things, oh, it'll be okay. In fact, the whole time before I met Dan, it was constantly, oh, you're so young. You need to get out there, get out in the market again.
Immediately they're trying.
When you're a widow, you still feel married. So it's not like, going through a divorce and you close that chapter and you're moving on. Each person's journey is their own. And in a way, kind of cherish that. Because if you don't have feelings of grief, then that person didn't really matter. Having those feelings just made me recognize how special that relationship was.
And I think I say this over and over when I'm talking about grief. It's a personal journey, and it's okay to do it however you need to do it, but you got to do it.
Right.
Because what happens often is people just don't do it. They don't grieve. So I love that. Describe to me what a grief attack is.
I would say it's similar to, well, actually, I don't ever hear it written, so I can't give you the words.
But what did it feel like for you?
It's just an overwhelming feeling of crying and just it going on for a period of time, and you're just kind of stuck. You don't move, you just kind of it's just pure raw emotions, and then just an anger kind of mixed in with it too. And then you just kind of feel drained at the end of it. But it's, fortunately, I never even had that at work. The brain also kind of works with you through the grief as well. If I heard something uncomfortable to me, my brain would shut down. And I would be seeing things, but I wasn't able to process it. And then when I get out of it, I'd be like, well, I can't remember anything that just happened. I know I was there, but my brain started protecting me from, going to those deep dark spaces and stuff too. But I will say also, on the other side of that, I'm a different person for it. I cherish my relationship so much better. I see the miracles around us. My gratitude is so much more heightened now with all of the little things there. I'm a better person and a better wife to Dan because of everything that I went through. I don't sweat the small stuff as much. It's just so I think that it's one of those things where it can be a blessing. It sucks when you're going through it.
Yeah. And it's so hard to say because,
Yes.
of course I would do anything to have my kids back. But I can honestly say, like, I would not have them or not, change anything and not have those relationships. And I am a better person for working through those things. But I think many people are kind of stuck in their trauma or their grief. I think these are two things. In the Mentally Strong Method, we have people organize stuff. So, trauma, grief, negative self-talk, anxiety, behaviors and choices, right? Because what happens when you've experienced trauma or grief, all those things are together, right? And so you start with that negative dialogue, and you're not supposed to be talking to yourself like that, but it's a kind of a mesh with the trauma. You're not dealing with the trauma. And so kind of helping people separate those things and say, this is the trauma. We can't change the trauma from the past, right? We can't change the grief, but how do we actually process that? And learning to process our grief. And it's pretty raw, like me crying and me, hitting punching bags and just really showing, like, these are the things that I did, but everybody has to figure out what works for them. And I think oftentimes people suggest things and they're just trying to be helpful.
Right.
But you're like, I'm not going to talk to everybody about my grief. Like, that's not me. So I think it's important that we continue to talk about, you got to figure out how to process, but it can be unique to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You just got to do it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about somebody comes, calls you guys and says, I'm a first responder. Is this insurance-based, all not-for-profit? How do people hear about you? How do they come in, and what are the kind of the steps?
Yeah, so since we're nonprofit, we don't charge any first responders or their immediate family members for counseling. We have a scholarship program, so there's certain parameters that they have to follow. In order to, but it's really simple. They need to show up for their sessions. If there are no shows, then
Which is a problem in our industry, actually.
But yeah, we get grants. We hold our golf tournament once a year. We do other fundraising, donations, that sort of stuff to pay for the first responders and their family members' counseling. But yeah, they'll give us a call and we'll get them set up either with me if I have room on my schedule. We have a contractor that works in our office with us, and we also have an intern. And so we've got 3 avenues, and we have an independent contractor outside of the office. And he deals a lot with addiction, so a lot of addiction counseling will refer them over to the other contractor. They just get set up, they fill out the paperwork stuff, and they come in for their intake, and then we determine what is the best course of action for them.
And are you seeing a lot of trauma specific, or is this kind of cumulative? One of the things that I noticed, especially in men, is they have kind of a compartmentalized brain. And they get through life. They have some childhood trauma, but they put it in a box. But then we all kind of get to a breaking point. Sometimes that's using substances, right, to try to keep everything in the box. But they get to that breaking point, and kind of everything comes out at one time. Do you see that?
Yeah, quite frequently.
Yeah.
And especially since COVID and the burnout that happened through the whole pandemic, that brought a lot more of the anxiety and cumulative trauma out in a lot of people, a lot of the first responders and their family members. So we see some that are very trauma specific, but you're right, most of it's cumulative. Cumulative or burnout. We're seeing a lot of burnout too.
So talk to the audience about a first responder let's just go with paramedic, and they come on a scene and they have to do CPR. There's, a life or death situation. This likely happens at least a couple times a week for a first responder.
Sometimes, depending on the area that they work in. Down here in the big city, they may see a lot more cardiac arrests, a lot more patients, a lot more homeless and that sort of stuff. So a whole variety of, I worked up in a rural area, and so cardiac arrests weren't as frequent as what you might see down here, but I mean, I could not count how many. It was just over 25 years.
Right, but there's like multiple micro traumas throughout their week.
Right.
And talk to the audience about how that creates a PTSD or bringing up childhood things.
Yeah, so the cumulative part of it obviously is there. The other piece of that cumulative part is they go to a call, and then they're coming back from that, they're coming down off of that, and boom, they get hit with another call that could be pretty traumatic, or child call, something like that, and so they don't have time to process through this one before they're going on another and then on another, and that's where a lot of the compartmentalizing comes in, because we can't bring our emotions out when we're running on all these calls, so we got to stuff them away. Problem with stuffing them away is we don't bring them back out later to work on them, and so it's like, oh, they'll just stay in there. And then pretty soon the thing just kind of spills over and takes over the life. But the other thing too, especially when you're talking about family life, home life outside of work, is there's no such thing as a vacuum. You can't separate one from the other, no matter how well we think we can do that. One thing's going to still affect the other. When I went through the stuff that I went through, at the same time, I had 5 pediatric deaths at the same time. My first SIDS death was just before she was born, and then I had 4 other ped deaths within 2.5 months after she was born. I started seeing her in all of the calls, so I started taking all of those personally, and when we take something personally, that's when we're going to get traumatized by other people's trauma, that vicarious trauma.
Yeah, because I'm so public about my grief and stuff, people who have lost a child asked to meet me personally, and my staff is sometimes scared, like, that will trigger me. And actually, that is not what triggers me. I can sit with a grieving mother. What I can't sit with is someone who has killed their child. Even talking about it just, brings up those triggers. So knowing your triggers is important too. I can still, be a provider. I can still care for people and just remove myself with that when those things come up, Knowing your triggers are important.
Very important. As we learn through all our training, it's when the client comes in and talks with us, it's not about us, it's about them. So using our own stories is very well and good. That's self-disclosure. Yeah, if you don't know your triggers, you're not going to know what's going to trigger you.
Yeah. My therapist just talks about herself or himself. So when I disclose, I'll say, I have lost 3 children, and I understand that pain. But I don't tell any details of the story. Like, it's not, that the time that we're with our clients is for their benefit. So some additional training that needs to happen for licensed counselors out there. But if you go to a counselor and you feel like this is BS or this is not working, try another counselor. And that's why I asked you, how many did you have to try before you found one that could help you? Unfortunately, just the initials behind someone's name doesn't, show. And then sometimes it could be a really good counselor. It's just not a fit, right? Right. They don't understand first responder, or they don't understand, or there's a perception that they can't help you. And so try another one is what I tell people often. Yeah. So tell us a little more about what services you offer, like, to the family. Do you run groups? Are they courses?
Yeah, so we have a support group that goes on every other Thursday for first responders. Family members could come to that, but we haven't really had any family members that come to that. It's mostly just first responders being able to share their stories with other people who get it and help normalize what they're going through. For couples, we do a Prepare and Enrich. That is a national-based program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Not familiar with it. So
And,
tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful program because the couples, and they could either be premarital or in a marriage or cohabitating. It can be spiritual-based, depending on their denomination or non. They take an assessment independently of each other. And then once they're done with the assessments, we come in and we talk about it. And it's usually 99.9% correct. So what that shows them is, maybe they've got mismanaged expectations, they've got
identifying the actual problem instead of going back and forth.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it breaks down a lot of the different problems that they might be experiencing, especially communication, conflict resolution, finances, those kind of things. And then we develop a plan to figure out what's their priorities. And usually it starts off with learning how to communicate, understanding conflict resolution, and those kind of things. Well, what I have found to be one of the biggest benefits to the program is they ask the question about how important are you willing to do whatever it takes to make your marriage work? And usually, especially the devitalized couples, think the other person doesn't want the relationship. And so they're coming from a place of fear. So everything that they do is out of just fear that their relationship is over. And so what I usually do is I'll show them what their response is, that they are going to do whatever it takes for it. And that's a game changer. And them seeing in black and white, and it isn't just them saying it to them, they actually believe it when they see it that way. And that changes the whole course of it. And what's nice is that the format is such that they create the skill sets within themselves to work through it. I can give them pointers, like saying, make sure you use I statements, not you statements, that kind of thing. But they have to figure out what works for them. Usually just having them be able to talk and define what their needs are and the other person listening, it's really, really nice to be able to do that. Every once in a while, clients will bring in their children to help, talk to their children about that. Dan could talk more about that. We also have a kids film where we interview kids from 4 years old all the way up to 17 years old. And it's amazing how they say the same thing, just only in the language that they are familiar with. And then we have a facilitator guide that goes with that, where we encourage the family to sit down together, and then there's questions that you ask around the kitchen table or whatever on a road trip that get to the heart of it. What do kids think about them as a first responder? What about if they can't make the birthday party or the first game? How can they make that up to them? Really try to focus on, with all of our training, especially when we're talking about families and stuff, and put their first family first. You've got your department families, brothers and sisters there, whatever, but they're not going to be there when you retire. They're not going to be there when you're going through your personal challenges. We really try to focus on keep them first, because you do not want them resenting you. Which often happens. What we try to do is promoting that, because right now divorce rates are anywhere from 50% all the way up to 95%, depending on what your gender and department you work in. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's why we created the Intimate Partners film, because you're going to go through challenges. There's never a relationship that doesn't have challenges. We've had challenges, but it's just defining them as growing pains. As simple as doing something like that, and recognizing that you come from two different pasts, and that you just have to kind of work through, sometimes needs outside help for that, work through what you're going through. But listening skills, communications, just all part of that communication skills, conflict resolution skills. Those are so critical.
You have built an amazing program.
So,
do you have a vision of taking it outside of Colorado Springs? What is your vision for the not-for-profit?
We do the entire state. And then, our training can go anywhere. Our films have been seen across the world, and they're being shown in departments in Canada and over in Europe to their personnel. So it's already doing that. This is our ministry, so we're just doing whatever he tells us to do, and we have visions of going even further, of opening up a an intensive trauma retreat type thing for, primarily Colorado, but I mean, we welcome in any first responders across the states there, but that requires a lot of capital, and it requires a lot of staff, so we're kind of just growing organically to meet
that
the
is very
needs of our
exciting.
first responders.
Yeah.
So do you have anything else to add to that?
No, sounds like you did a good job.
Yeah.
Don't want to overshadow you.
Do you work individually with kids as well, or do you normally send them out if they needed counseling?
Other family members will work as a family unit, but individually as kids, I'll refer them out.
Okay. Well, good. Now, this has been a great conversation. We'll definitely have the link to your website in the description. Tell us about the golf tournament and what people can do to support you guys.
Yeah. So we have our golf tournament in May. That is our annual fundraiser. It happens at Fort Carson. I mean, that golf course, because it's private, but it's very low cost because of the military, and they offer the first responders the same rate as the military. So it's wonderful. We're able to keep the cost low.
Yeah.
It's more about getting awareness out, shutting down the stigma associated with it, and it's primarily men that go out there. And we had 50% of our golfers were first responders last year. And so it's just been a really good time. We're going to have our 7th one coming up, and we pack the entire course. So we have 144 golfers usually that come out, and we offer food and an afternoon buffet and prizes.
Definitely,
a lot of fun.
when you're getting sponsors and stuff, give us an email. We'll definitely love to be a part of that. And that's already on the website now.
No, I have to set up the each year.
So go back to it,
Yeah, I'll definitely send you an email.
Yeah.
Thank you. That would be awesome.
Any last words that you want to say to our audience?
The biggest thing is getting back to that stigma stuff. It's one of the reasons why I did not engage in counseling as I should have way back when, is that whole stigma thing, appearing weak, appearing like I'm not capable of doing the job and stuff like that. But as I've learned through the years and working with first responders, it takes a lot more strength to come forward and talk about this stuff. So it's not a weakness, it's a strength to get the help and reach out for help.
I always say everybody's on a mental health journey. You might not be actively participating and trying to improve, but we're all on one.
Right.
And so stop thinking mental illness, but thinking mental health. Like we all have to figure out what works for us.
We even use mental readiness sometimes in our terms, being mentally ready for whatever life throws at you.
And take vacations often.
Yes.
I tell my clients that if they have vacation left over at the end of the year, they're not doing proper self-care. Especially as the last couple of years have shown that burnout rate. The easiest way to take care of burnout is take care of yourself and go out and do stuff outside of work and take a couple weeks off, getting completely away from the city and everything.
It's also important, the financial piece that you're offering, because many times people don't take that vacation because of financial reasons. They'd rather be working, or if their job allows for payout, they'd rather have the cash. But it's so important to be taking that time. Thank you so much. This was really good content.